For the past 2 years, it's been illegal to go in public or private spaces without your mask on. But this has now changed. President Cyril Ramaphosa announcing last night that members of the public no longer need to wear masks outdoors in open spaces. While some scientists have criticized this decision, other political parties as well, civil society organizations, they've all had their own take on this issue. We're asking, what is the next step insofar as our management of the pandemic is concerned? And is this it? Joining us for more reaction to the President's speech, we're joined by the CEO of the SA Medical Research Council, Professor Glenda Gray, and Professor Shabir Madhi, who is a Wits Professor of Vaccinology. To both of our guests, thanks very much indeed. Prof. Madhi, I want to begin with you this morning because you have written extensively on the fact that South Africa is at the tail end, I don't know if you'd word it this way, but at the tail end of the pandemic?
Good morning. Yes, very much so. They are at the tail end of the pandemic. In fact, what I would also refer to as a recovery phase. In that, what happens in South Africa, unfortunately, is a high percentage of the population, 80 to 85%, develop protection against severe disease due to COVID because of being infected with the virus at least once since the start of the pandemic. And coupled to that, there's been some modest uptake of vaccines. What that has resulted in is extensive protection against severe disease and death, where we're no longer needing to focus on infections, but really focus on what threat COVID poses when it comes to overburdening of healthcare facilities and people dying. And that burden, that risk has diminished substantially now.
Professor Gray, I wonder whether those who are against the regulations that the President announced last night, whether at the top of their minds is the timing right, given, there are some projections that we're now on the cusp of a fifth wave of infections going into winter?
I think the President mentioned and didn't emphasize enough the importance of vaccine coverage. And as Professor Madhi said, together with previous infection and vaccine coverage, we can help decouple the cases from disease and death. And so the most important thing that the President said and should have emphasized was to increase vaccine coverage. That's our most important tool, as well as trying to make sure that we adhere to good ventilation and obviously the issue of wearing masks in public is an important move not to wear masks in open spaces. But in an area or an office block or a workplace where you have lots and lots of vaccine coverage, the issue of masks becomes less important.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I'm ready to go even out in public without a mask. One just wonders what the public response to these new regulations will be, whether it will be relief and whether we'll now see the streets of our country awash with people maskless and we'll see everyone's faces again after 2 years, or whether there is going to be that period of time for us to shift in our mindsets. Prof. Madhi.
Yeah, I think the public has already spoken. I mean, in the environments that I go into on a daily basis, very few people are wearing masks on the streets. And in fact, even people that are wearing a mask, including people wearing a mask indoors, are not wearing the right type of mask and they're wearing it incorrectly. And pretending that masking is actually preventing people from being infected or transmitting the virus into the environment is disingenuous, because the reality is that in the South African context, these masks have not prevented infections. Had it prevented infections, we wouldn't have had 80 to 85% of the population being infected at least once since the start of the pandemic. So yes, there is a need for a mindset shift, but at the same time, we're in a very different phase of this pandemic, and it's, again, to emphasize, it's no longer about preventing infections. South Africa has failed dismally when it comes to preventing infections. Much of the regulations that were imposed didn't do much. All that it did, it extended the period of time over which infections might have transpired, perhaps extending the wave by 1 or 2 weeks. But it didn't actually reduce the absolute number of infections. It hasn't done so in the past, and it's not going to do so in the future.
I mean, given what you're just saying, it's not about preventing infections. The country has done so incredibly dismally at doing just that, at preventing infections. It stands to reason then that we should have lifted the state of disaster by now.
Absolutely. The state of disaster should have been lifted even before the fourth wave, which is when we were advocating for it to be lifted. In fact, unfortunately, because of the state of disaster, we end up with a situation where the Department of Health, as an example, is planning to have regulations which are completely unfit for purpose. although it's up for public comment, there won't be any parliamentary oversight about it being adopted because of the state of disaster. So the Department of Health can actually ram through regulations which simply are illogical, inconsistent, and irrational.
Yeah. In fact, we've had a discussion this morning with UDM leader Bantu Holomisa, who's echoing exactly what you're saying there, Prof. Madhi, and in fact also advocating for the NCCC to be disbanded, given this lack of parliamentary oversight.
Sure, there seems to be an interplay between the MAC advisories that are written and are very good, and the lack of implementation of the MAC advisories, which I think is an important issue, and that there seems to be a gap between what the scientists are saying and what is being implemented.
Given what you've also said, Prof. Gray, around vaccine coverage in the country, now's the time as well, going into winter, for us to reiterate the importance of booster shots?
Yes, I think we have a commitment as citizens of this country and as to try and prevent severe disease and death. And the only way we can do this is to continue to get vaccinated or get boosted. And it'll be very important for us as we go into the winter months. There will be ongoing transmission. We don't expect to eradicate transmission. And so the only way we can prevent the overburdening of hospitals is to make sure we get boosted and that people who have not been vaccinated get vaccinated. Particularly if we want to move to other states where we don't have to wear masks and we use vaccination as the most important tool to control the severe disease and death.
So, Prof. Gray, what do the next few months look like in the country if indeed we're looking at it in a context where this is the tail end of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, as long as there's virus transmission, there'll be viral evolution, and the viral evolution will spur on variants, which may then lead to the next wave of outbreak. And so we do expect an additional wave, and hopefully it'll be like Omicron, that there will be a decoupling of cases from death and disease, and I expect that will happen because given the high rates of hybrid immunity in the country.
Yeah. The importance of vaccinations, Prof. Madhi, does that extend to that age group that we've yet to get approval from the regulator from, the 5 and above children, to get vaccinated as well?
Yeah, and when it comes to vaccines, we need to get as many people vaccinated as possible. But at the end of the day, again, the main focus of vaccination is prevention of severe disease and death. South Africa will achieve much more if we get 90% of the population above the age of 50 vaccinated than a random 40 million people. So the vaccine program, yes, we need to get as many people vaccinated as possible, but we cannot lose sight of the main focus of the program, which is to protect those at the highest risk of ending up in hospital and dying. When it comes to children 5 to 12 years, under the current climate, there's very little reason for those children to be vaccinated because close on to 3/4 of them have also been infected with the virus at least once since the start of the pandemic. There's recent data which has just come out from Qatar, which shows that past infection protects against reinfection due to the virus. So I'm not too fixated about vaccinating young children. The focus in South Africa where we failed is to get more than 90% of people above the age of 50 vaccinated.
Yeah. Let me thank you both for your time this morning, and perhaps I'll just get some parting comments from you, Prof. Gray and Prof. Madhi, around your feelings around this time of the pandemic, being the tail end of the pandemic. You've been, speaking to us here on the AM Report very regularly over the past 2 years. What's your sense, just on a personal/professional level, of the stage of the pandemic?
We have to make sure that our economy gets reignited, and that's the most important focus. We have to try and live with transmission, but make sure that we don't ever keep our children out of school again, keep our universities closed, or keep our tourism and workplaces closed. We have to get back to work. We have to make sure that money starts to flow in this country.
Absolutely.
Too many people have lost their jobs.
Prof. Madhi?
Yeah, I fully agree with Prof. Gray. We need to stop pretending that COVID-19 poses the same risk that it posed a year ago. We need to stop living under code red. We need to get back to a normal lifestyle for all intents and purposes. And we can get to that point if we can get especially high-risk individuals vaccinated as quickly as possible. because it's very unlikely to be any type of a wave compared with what we experienced during the course of the first 3 waves in South Africa.
Absolutely. To both of our guests, once again, thanks so much for your time. Professor Glenda Gray is the CEO of the SA Medical Research Council. Prof. Shabir Madhi is Wits Professor of Vaccinology. Thank you again for joining us.